She was black. She was a maid. And in their eyes, that was all she would ever be. They wrote a word on her 8-year-old daughter's arm, in permanent ink, while other children watched and laughed. A word meant to remind that little girl exactly what they thought she was worth. And when her mother went to the school to fight for her, they smiled. They blocked every complaint. They made phone calls. They pulled strings. Because they had money. Because they had power. Because they believed that money and power made them untouchable. What they didn't know was who lived in that mansion. What they didn't know was what that little girl's eyes looked like. Slightly tilted at the corners, deliberate, still, exactly like his. He never raised his voice in that meeting room. He never had to. 7 men who had watched him dismantle empires sat perfectly still while he spoke 4 sentences that rearranged the entire world of a little girl who drew dragons in a notebook because crying had stopped feeling like enough. She is my heir. 4 words. And every single person who had laughed, who had blocked, who had written on that child's arm, felt the ground shift beneath their feet. But what happened when he knelt in that garden? What passed between a father, a mother, and a daughter who already knew the truth before anyone said it out loud? That is the part that will stay with you long after this video ends. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and click Join to become a member and help our channel. She is my heir, he said, and the words landed in that room the way a blade lands in silence. Not loud, not rushed, just final. No one at that table moved. No one breathed in a way that could be heard. 7 men who had watched Jung Tae-Soo dismantle empires with a phone call and rebuild them with a signature sat perfectly still, because they had all learned, at different points in their lives, that when this man spoke in that particular register, low, unhurried, with the faint pressure of absolute certainty behind each syllable, the correct response was stillness. The room smelled of leather and cold coffee. The overhead lights were bright and unforgiving, the kind of lighting that leaves nowhere to hide, and Tae-Soo had chosen that room for exactly that reason. He stood at the head of the table with both hands flat against the surface, the black dragon tattoo climbing the right side of his neck, catching the light with every shallow breath he took. He was not angry. That was the part that made the men across from him most afraid. He was not angry at all. He was decided. 3 floors below, in the small corridor that connected the mansion's service wing to the main garden, a woman was standing with her back against the wall and both hands pressed flat to her thighs, doing the thing she always did when her mind was moving faster than her body could manage, keeping her hands busy, keeping them still, pressing them into the fabric of her uniform as if the pressure alone could hold the moment from unraveling. Layla Monroe had been standing there for 4 minutes. She knew this because she had counted. Counting was something she did. It was the same instinct that made her align the salt and the pepper, straighten the frames, fold the cloth 4 times instead of 2. Order, when everything else was moving. She had not gone into that room. She did not need to. She had heard him through the door, the way you hear thunder before the rain arrives. Not the words exactly, but the weight of them, the shape of them pressing through the walls. And she had known, even before she pressed her ear close enough to be certain, that this was not a moment she could stop, that she had never been able to stop this, that perhaps she had never truly wanted to. Down the hall, further still, past the door that was always slightly ajar, a child sat cross-legged on a narrow bed with a notebook open on her knees. Layla Monroe was 8 years old, and had the kind of face that absorbed everything without giving much away. Large, dark eyes that moved slowly and deliberately. A small gap where a front tooth had fallen out 2 weeks ago, and the new one hadn't yet arrived. Hair in 2 perfect puffs held by white elastic bands that her mother retied every morning with the focused care of someone performing something sacred. She was drawing. She was always drawing. Tonight it was the dragon again, the one she had been refining for weeks. The neck scales, the line of the jaw, the way the body curved without looking soft. She had gotten the neck right, finally. She didn't know why it mattered so much to get the neck right. She only knew that it did. She had not been told what was happening upstairs. She had not been told a great many things. But Nia was the kind of child who understood the temperature of a room before she entered it, who noticed when her mother's hands were busy for no reason, who had learned early that silence in this house was never empty. It was always full of something that the adults had not yet found words for. She understood that tonight the house felt different, heavier, like the air before a storm that doesn't come with wind, just with the slow, certain change of pressure that you feel first in your chest. She pressed the pencil to the page, finished the dragon's neck, looked at it for a long moment. Then she wrote, in the careful, uneven letters of a child who was still learning how much words could hold. They tried to make her disappear. They did not know who she belonged to. She closed the notebook, hugged it to her chest, and waited, the way she had always waited, for the truth to find its way to her. The meeting ended the way all of Tae-Soo's meetings ended. Not with debate, not with negotiation, but with the quiet closing of a door that everyone in the room understood was not an invitation to reopen. The 7 men filed out in the particular order that hierarchy demands, each one carrying the weight of what they had just witnessed in their own way. Some with relief, some with calculation. One, the oldest, a man named Park, who had known Tae-Soo since before the tattoo, before the title, before all of it, with something that looked, if you caught it in the right light, almost like grief. Not for the declaration, for the years it had taken to get there. Tae-Soo remained at the table after they left. He did not move for a long time. He stood with his hands still flat against the surface, looking at the space where 7 faces had been, and he did the thing that no one who worked for him had ever seen him do. He let himself feel the full weight of what he had just made irreversible. Not regret. He was long past the geography of regret. But weight, yes. The particular heaviness of a man who has spent 8 years making one kind of choice and has just, in the span of 4 sentences, made the opposite one. He thought about a kitchen. He thought about flour on an apron. He thought about a laugh that had no performance in it, no calculation, no awareness of being watched. Just sound, just warmth, just a woman who had never once laughed for his benefit and had therefore given him something no one else ever had. He picked up his phone, looked at the photograph he had never deleted, put the phone face down on the table. Then he walked out of the room and down 3 flights of stairs, and he moved through the service corridor with the same unhurried certainty with which he moved through every space he occupied. And he found her, exactly where some part of him had always known she would be, standing with her back against the wall, hands pressed to her thighs, eyes closed, doing the quiet internal work of holding herself together that she had been doing, alone, for 8 years. She heard him coming. She always heard him. It was something she had never been able to explain and had long since stopped trying. She opened her eyes. He stopped 2 feet from her and looked at her the way he always looked at her when there was no one else in the room. Without the careful blankness, without the 3-second delay, with something that was simply and devastatingly direct. She spoke first, because she always spoke first when she was frightened. And she was frightened, though not of him. "You can't take it back." "I know." "They'll watch her now. Everything she does. Everything we do."
"Yes."
"That doesn't bother you?" It was not a question. She knew it wasn't a question even as she said it. He looked at her steadily.
"What bothers me," he said, "is that I let 8 years pass before I said it."
Layla pressed the back of her head against the wall, looked at the ceiling. The corridor light was fluorescent and unflattering, and she didn't care even slightly, which told him more about where she was emotionally than anything she might have said. "She drew the dragon again tonight."
"I know."
"You've been watching the cameras."
"I always watch the cameras."
She lowered her eyes from the ceiling and looked at him directly. And in that look was everything that 8 years of silence had compressed into something almost unbearable. The love that had never stopped. The anger that had never fully arrived. The grief of a woman who had made the only choice she believed was available to her, and had lived inside that choice every single day since. "She already knows," Layla said quietly. "She's known longer than either of us. She just doesn't have the language for it yet."
"Then we give her the language."
"Tonight?"
"No."
He paused.
"But soon. Before someone else does."
The corridor was very still. Somewhere deeper in the house, a clock marked the hour. Neither of them moved. Then Layla did the thing she had been stopping herself from doing for 8 years. She stopped stopping herself. She didn't reach for him. She simply let her shoulders down, fully, completely, in the way that a body lets go when it has been held rigid for too long. And she breathed out slowly. And she stayed there, with her back against the wall, while he stayed 2 feet away. And the distance between them was smaller than it had ever been. Not closed, but smaller. It was enough for tonight. It was, in fact, more than enough. The morning came the way mornings do after nights that change everything. Ordinary on the surface, altered underneath. The kitchen smelled of coffee and toast. The garden outside was pale with early light. The mansion moved through its routines with the practiced efficiency of a house that had learned to function regardless of what its walls had witnessed. And Layla moved through it too. Uniform pressed, hair pinned, hands occupied, because occupied hands were the only kind she knew how to have. Nia sat at the small table in the service kitchen, the one that was technically for staff, but had become, over years of quiet negotiation, simply theirs, with her school blazer already buttoned, her pompons freshly tied, her notebook open beside her bowl of cereal. She was not drawing. She was reading what she had written the night before, the way you read something you produced in a state you can't quite re-enter, trying to understand what part of you had known enough to write it. They tried to make her disappear. They did not know who she belonged to. She read it twice. Then she closed the notebook, put it in her bag beside the panda keychain, and ate her cereal without comment. Layla watched her from the counter and felt the particular terror of a mother who recognizes her own resilience reflected back at her in a child's face. The terror of knowing that the strength you gave her was also the wound you gave her. That the ability to absorb and continue was not the same thing as the ability to heal. "Mai," Nia said, without looking up from her bowl. Layla stilled. Mia only used that word, the Portuguese one, soft at the edges, when she was reaching for something she didn't have English for. Yes, baby? Is today different? Layla set down the cup she was holding, turned to face her daughter fully. What do you mean? Nia looked up then. Those large, dark eyes, slightly tilted at the outer corners in a way that had always seemed to Layla both entirely familiar and entirely inexplicable, moved over her mother's face with that slow, deliberate attention that had been making adults uncomfortable since Nia was 3 years old. The house feels different, she said simply. Like something happened that isn't finished happening yet. Layla crossed to the table, sat down across from her daughter, put both hands flat on the surface between them, not reaching, not performing calm, just present. Something did happen, she said, and you're right that it isn't finished. But it's nothing bad. I promise you it's nothing bad. Nia considered this with the gravity of a child who has learned to measure promises carefully. Is it about me? Yes. Is it about him? The kitchen was very quiet. Layla held her daughter's gaze and did not look away, because she had promised herself years ago that when this moment came, she would not look away. And the moment was here now, or the edge of it was, and she was not going to flinch. We're going to talk, Layla said. The 3 of us. Soon. Nia looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded, once, with the particular solemnity of a child who has been waiting for an answer for so long that the confirmation of its existence is almost enough on its own. She picked up her spoon, finished her cereal. Okay, she said, and meant it completely. 3 floors up, Tae-Soo was on the phone. He had been on the phone since 6 in the morning, which was not unusual. What was unusual was the nature of the calls, not the coded language of logistics and territory, not the careful architecture of plausible deniability that governed most of his communications, but something more direct, more surgical, more personal. His lawyer first. 40 minutes. Documents that had existed in draft form for 2 years, reviewed and revised and never signed, were now being prepared for signature. Legal recognition. Formal documentation. The kind of paperwork that rearranges the architecture of a life. Then a call to a man he trusted more than most and liked less than few. A private investigator named Cole who had worked adjacent to the syndicate for a decade and understood the difference between information that needed to be used and information that needed simply to exist as leverage. Ashford Crane, Tae-Soo said, without preamble. Already have a file, Cole said. I know. I want it complete. Every conversation she had with the school board in the last 18 months. Every email her husband's office sent. Every favor called in. And Harrington? Harrington I'm handling directly. The Whitmore woman? Tae-Soo was quiet for a moment. She handled herself, he said. But I want documentation of what she said at that event. Time-stamped. Verified. In case she decides to reframe it. Consider it done. He ended the call. Stood at the window. The garden below was catching the full morning light now, and the bench where Nia always sat was empty but somehow still held the impression of her. The particular quality of a space that has been occupied by someone who matters. He watched the empty bench for a long time. Then he picked up his phone again and sent a single message to Layla. Tonight, all 3 of us. Garden. He put the phone in his pocket. And for the first time in 8 years, Jung Tae-Soo made a plan that had nothing to do with the syndicate. Nothing to do with leverage or territory or the careful management of power. A plan that was simply and entirely about showing up. They met in the garden as the last of the daylight was leaving. That particular hour when the sky holds two colors at once, and everything beneath it feels suspended, neither day nor night, neither what it was, nor what it is about to become. Tae-Soo was already there when they arrived, standing beside the bench with his hands in his pockets, the dragon tattoo catching the fading light, the Patek Philippe on his wrist catching it too. And he looked, in that moment, like something Nia had drawn before she knew what she was drawing. She stopped walking when she saw him. Layla, half a step behind, felt the stillness move through her daughter's body like a current, and she placed one hand lightly on Nia's shoulder. Not to guide her, not to prepare her, simply to say, I am here. Whatever happens next, I am directly behind you. Nia took 3 steps forward on her own. She stood in front of him with her school bag on her back and the panda keychain swaying slightly from the strap, and her hands loose at her sides. And she looked up at him with those slow, deliberate eyes. And he looked down at her with the careful attention of a man who has rehearsed a moment so many times in private that the actual arrival of it renders all rehearsal useless. He lowered himself, not fully to his knees, one knee on the garden path, one foot flat, which brought him close enough to her level that she didn't have to crane her neck to hold his gaze. The fabric of his trousers pressed into the stone, and he did not appear to notice or care. Nia, he said. I know, she said. He paused. What do you know? She tilted her head slightly, the way she always did when she was organizing something internally. I know you're my father, she said, with the directness of a child who has been carrying a word for a long time and is finally allowed to set it down. I've known for a while. I didn't know how I knew. I just knew. He held her gaze and did not look away, and did not speak immediately, because some moments require the fullness of their own silence before anything else can be added to them. I'm sorry, he said finally, that I wasn't there to say it first. Nia considered this with the gravity she brought to all important things. Were you scared? She asked. The question landed with the particular precision that only children achieve. Not cruel, not calculated, simply true, aimed directly at the thing that adults spend their entire lives learning to disguise. He did not hesitate. Yes, he said. I was scared. Of what? Of not being enough. He paused. Of being too much. Of the world you would have to live in because of who I am. Mia looked at him for a long moment. Behind her, Layla had stopped breathing in any way that could be measured. They wrote on my arm, Nia said, not as accusation, as fact. Because of who I am. Because of what I look like. And you weren't there for that either. The words were quiet. They were devastating. No, he said. I wasn't. But you're here now. Yes. She looked at him for 3 more seconds, long enough that even he felt the assessment of it, the full weight of being evaluated by someone who had every reason to find him insufficient and had not yet decided whether she would. Then she opened her school bag, took out the notebook, opened it to the page with the dragon, the neck finally right, the scales finally detailed, the jaw finally holding the particular quality she had been trying to capture for weeks without knowing what she was trying to capture. She held it out to him. He took it, looked at it, and the thing that moved across his face then was not an expression that anyone in the Black Crane Syndicate had ever seen, or would have recognized if they had. It was simply a man, undone, quietly,
by 8 years of distance and a child's drawing of a dragon that looked exactly like the one on his neck. "You got the scales right," he said, his voice lower than usual. "It took me a long time," she said. "I kept getting the neck wrong." "What changed?" She shrugged, with the particular economy of a child who hasn't yet learned to over-explain. "I stopped trying to draw what I thought it looked like," she said. "And I drew what I actually saw." He looked at her. She looked back at him. Between them, the notebook was open, and the dragon was perfect, and the garden was holding that suspended light that belongs to no hour in particular. Behind them, Layla made a sound that was not quite a word and not quite a breath. Something in between. Something that had been waiting 8 years for the exact right moment to exist. Tae-Soo stood. He was careful about it, deliberate, as if standing too quickly might disturb something fragile in the air. He handed the notebook back to Nia. She took it and hugged it to her chest in the way she always did. Not possessively, but protectively. The way you hold something that holds you back. He looked at Layla over the top of Nia's head. She looked at him. There was no performance in it, no negotiation, no wall and no door and no corridor between them. Just two people standing in a garden at the end of a very long day, on the other side of a silence that had finally, irrevocably, been broken. "We have things to figure out," Layla said. "We do," he agreed. "It won't be simple." It never was. She nodded slowly. He nodded back. And Nia, standing between them with her notebook against her chest and her panda keychain catching the last of the garden light, looked up at the sky the way she looked at blank pages, with the particular attention of someone who understands that what comes next depends entirely on what you are willing to see. She reached out with her free hand. Not toward him, not toward her mother. Just out, open, unhurried, into the space between all three of them. And the space, for the first time, reached back. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever watched someone be judged, dismissed, or humiliated simply because of who they are or where they come from, and felt completely powerless to stop it? Have you ever carried a truth in silence for so long that the silence itself became its own kind of prison, and wondered what would have changed if you had spoken sooner? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, justice, and the kind of love that refuses to stay buried, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click Join to become a part of our community and help the channel.